As Mike Tyson, the former heavyweight champion of the world, passes through a town, he decides to stop at a diner for a meal. As he comes out of his car, a group of racist bikers saw him and think to themselves that he doesn't belong here. Then they decided to start trouble by attacking. They weren't aware that they just messed with the world's toughest boxer and were about to be taught a lesson they will never forget. Subscribe and like the video to see how the story uncovers. The camera pans across the parking lot of a small-town diner, the space dominated by motorcycles and a boisterous group of men. In the center of this pack, a burly figure emerges. His name is Griff, and he is the leader of this gang. They sit outside the diner, drinking and laughing while making derogatory remarks about anyone who isn't part of their group, effectively intimidating passers-by who might dare to challenge their presence. As Griff and his gang continue to revel in their brashness, unaware of the storm that's about to hit their town, Mike Tyson arrives at the diner in his black SUV. Despite his notoriety, he's dressed modestly in a hoodie and jeans, keeping a low profile as he visits an old friend. Craving a bite to eat, he decides to stop at the diner for some grub, blissfully unaware of the rowdy group outside. As Mike Tyson exits his SUV, his formidable presence catches the attention of those in the vicinity. However, the gang, too lost in their own arrogance, mistake Tyson's restrained demeanors for weakness. Oblivious to the legendary fighter's reputation for explosive power and lightning-fast reflexes, they see him merely as an unsuspecting outsider who has stumbled into their territory. The stage is set for an explosive confrontation as Tyson makes his way towards the diner entrance, unaware that he's about to become the target of Griff and his gang's derision. A smirk spreads across Griff's face as he casts his gaze upon Mike Tyson. Raising an eyebrow, he calls out, his tone laced with derision. "Well, look at this guy," Griff sneers, gesturing to Tyson. "Thinks he's too good for a bike, huh?" His words, mocking and condescending, are a thinly veiled attempt to draw Tyson into a confrontation. The gang members chuckle and jeer in agreement, their bodies tensing like coiled springs ready to pounce should Tyson give them the slightest provocation. Mike Tyson remains calm and collected, his resolve unshaken by Griff's taunts. Without so much as a glance at the gang, he walks past them, his stride confident and measured. The gang, their laughter dying on their lips, watch as he heads towards the diner, their collective anger growing at Tyson's apparent disregard for their perceived. As he reaches the door, they share silent, venomous glances, a wordless agreement passing between them. Their patience frayed, they prepare to make their next move, oblivious to the danger that awaits them. Once inside the diner, Tyson maintains his low profile, ordering a burger and quietly slipping into a booth near the window. From his vantage point, he enjoys an unobstructed view of the busy parking lot, where Griff and his gang continue to loiter, their bravado still high despite being outplayed by Tyson's unflappable demeanor. As they survey the area, their eyes settle on the unmistakable silhouette of Tyson's black SUV, parked in close proximity to their motorcycles. A malicious glint appears in Griff's eyes, an idea forming in his mind that promises chaos and retribution. Griff, his face contorting into a sneer, speaks to his crew, his voice loud and dripping with contempt. "Who does he think he is, parking that fancy car next to our bikes?" he jeers, pointing towards Tyson's SUV. His words, laced with jealousy and indignation, rally his gang members, their collective anger solidifying into a single hostile entity. "We can't have some hotshot coming into our town and thinking he owns the place." At Griff's words, the simmering rage in the group ignites into a conflagration of malicious intent. The gang members, stirring with a newfound purpose, rising to his feet. Snake, a wiry man with slick back hair and a sinister grin, echoes Griff's sentiment. "Let's teach him some respect," he snarls, cracking his knuckles as he moves towards the diner door. His threat, raw and visceral, echoes throughout the group, their eyes alight with an eagerness for violence that borders on fanatical. Snake saunters into the diner with an arrogant swagger, his eyes locked on Tyson's back as he approaches the booth. Leaning against the table, he addresses Tyson with a venomous drawl, his voice laced with enough sarcasm to curdle milk. "Hey, pal," he sneers, his words heavy with contempt. "Nice car you got there, but you might want to move it before it gets damaged." The implicit threat hangs in the air like a toxic mist, Snake's smirk conveying his confidence in the gang's ability to make good on his promise. Tyson, having heard Snake's threat, finally turns his attention to the gang member, his gaze hardening as he sizes up the new threat. "I'm just here to eat," he replies, his voice low and steady. "Don't start trouble." Tyson's warning, spoken in the clipped tones of a man used to getting his way, underscores the gravity of the situation, his words laced with a controlled fury that threatens to erupt. Snake, undeterred, leans closer, his breath reeking of cheap beer as he attempts to intimidate Tyson further. Snake, his arrogance bolstered by the implied threat of his gang members waiting outside, reacts to Tyson's warning with mocking contempt. A malicious smile plays on his lips as he leans in closer, the stench of alcohol assaulting Tyson's nostrils as he slams his hand on the table. "Trouble? Who said anything about trouble?" he snarls, his voice. "I was just making a friendly suggestion." The air in the diner grows heavy with tension, the looming violence looming like a thundercloud over Tyson and Snake. But before the confrontation can escalate further, a shrill voice cuts through the silence, its volume punctuating the simmering anger. The source of the intervention is the waitress, a young woman with a sympathetic expression and a fiercely protective tone. "Hey, leave him alone," she says, her voice ringing with authority. "He's not bothering anyone." Snake's eyes, darkened by fury, flash with a murderous rage, his expression like a coiled snake ready to strike. He jerks away from Tyson, a warning growl rumbling in his throat. For a moment it seems as though the volatile gang member might unleash his fury on the waitress, but he restrains himself, shooting her a final withering glare as he turns on his heel. "Mind your own business," he spits, his words edged with menace. With his meal finished, as Tyson slowly rises from his booth, his movements deliberate and methodical, he walks towards the exit, his gaze fixed on the gang members lurking just outside, their presence like a wall of menace. The moment he steps out into the open, they converge upon him, the threat implicit in their numbers. The air crackles with tension as the gang closes in on their target, their eyes predatory, gleaming with anticipation. Tyson's expression remains impassive, his stance guarded and defensive. Griff, flanked by his gang, steps forward, a self-satisfied smile stretching across his face. His voice is like an oil slick, his words oozing with a malevolent charm. "Leaving so soon?" he drawls, his tone mocking and laced with venom. "We thought you might want to hang out with us for a while. You look like a guy who knows how to have a good time." His expression belies his true intent, the dark glint in his eyes indicating that having a good time is the last thing on his mind. Mike comes to a halt, his movements fluid and controlled as he slips his hands into his pockets, his stance conveying a deceptive nonchalance. His gaze, steady and piercing, fixes on Griff, his words a last-ditch attempt to defuse the situation. "I don't want any problems," he says, his voice a low rumble. "Just let me go, and we can forget this ever happened." The gang, sensing Tyson's determination, exchange glances, the group dynamic shifting as they struggle to decide their next move. The gang, their confidence bolstered by Griff's lead, erupt into mocking laughter, the sound sharp and cruel. The laughter is a deadly contagion, spreading throughout the group like wildfire, until the sound threatens to drown out all other noise. Griff, emboldened by the group's support, takes a step closer, his finger jabbing into Tyson's chest. "You're going to regret coming here," he hisses, his breath hot and heavy against Tyson's skin. "We're going to teach you a lesson about respect in the Iron Wolves." Tyson, stoic in the face of Griff's assault, remains immobile, his expression unchanging, his body language conveying a quiet defiance. Enraged by this perceived disrespect, Griff raises his arm and gestures to his crew with a curt nod, the silent command sending a ripple of excitement through the gang. They surge forward, surrounding Tyson like a pack of wolves closing in on their prey, their movements taut with anticipation. "Show him what happens when you mess with us," Griff growls, his voice brimming with raw rage. Like a coiled viper, Mike Tyson strikes, his movements a blur of expertly executed punches. The gang members, caught off guard by the sudden attack, barely have time to react before Tyson's fists connect with their faces, the impact sending them reeling. The force of the blows echoes throughout the parking lot, the sickening crunch of bones and cartilage adding a chilling soundtrack to the violence unfolding. In mere seconds, both men crumple to the ground, unconscious and bleeding, their bodies contorted at unnatural angles. The remaining gang members stare at the crumpled forms of their comrades, their mouths agape in shock. For a moment there is silence, a fleeting pause before the rage surges through their veins, overwhelming any lingering fear or hesitation. Griff, his eyes burning with hatred, reaches behind him and withdraws a chain from his back pocket, the links glinting malevolently in the dying sunlight. His movement prompts another member to brandish a baseball bat, the weapon held high, his fingers clenched tightly around the handle. As the gang encircles Tyson, closing in like a tightening noose, Griff's lips curl into a cruel smile, the chain dangling from his fist like a serpent. His words, carrying the weight of his murderous intent, ring out clear and cold in the tense silence. "Big mistake, tough guy," he snarls, his tone dripping with contempt. The words hang heavy in the air, underlining the gravity of the situation, the seriousness of which has become all too apparent to Tyson. Tyson, now in his element, cracks his knuckles, the sound a stark warning of the destruction he is capable of unleashing. His demeanor shifts, the calmness transforming into a steely intensity, the predatory gaze of a fighter ready to unleash hell upon his enemies. "You really don't want to do this," he says, his voice low and dangerous, each syllable punctuated by a palpable rage simmering beneath the surface. The words, a final desperate attempt to dissuade the gang from their path of violence, fall on deaf ears, their thirst for revenge clouding their judgment. The gang, howling with savage fury, descends upon Tyson in a frenzy of punches, kicks, and swinging chains. Like a force of nature unleashed, Tyson becomes a blur of motion, weaving and ducking around the attacks, his own punches and kicks landing with earth-shattering force. The carnage that ensues is a symphony of violence, the sound of flesh hitting flesh, and the grunts of pain that follow, filling the air like the howls of demons unleashed from the depths of hell. The camera, now in slow motion, lingers on Tyson's grace and precision, his movements a masterclass in raw power and technique. Each punch is a work of art, every step a ballet of destruction. He moves through the onslaught with a predatory grace, his reactions lightning fast as he parries attacks and unleashes his own devastating counterstrikes. The ferocity of the battle is matched only by the control and poise Tyson displays, the product of years of training and a storied career in the ring. Griff, his face a mask of rage and bruises, staggers backwards, staggering under the onslaught of Tyson's unrelenting assault. His eyes, wild and feral, dart from side to side as he tries to regain his footing, his breath coming in ragged gasps. In a desperate bid to turn the tide, he reaches into his pocket and withdraws a switchblade, flicking it open with a snap. The blade glints menacingly in the fading light, a deadly promise in Griff's hand. "Let's see how tough you are now," he bellows, his words choked with anger and desperation. As Tyson hears Griff's challenge, a steely glint flashes in his eyes, the expression on his face hardening into a mask of pure determination. Without hesitation, he advances towards the gang leader, his steps measured and calculated, his movements that of a predator closing in for the kill. "You're about to find out," he growls, the weight of those words carrying the promise of impending doom. Griff, emboldened by his desperate situation, lunges forward, the knife gleaming in his hand. Griff's desperate lunge is met with a blur of motion as Mike sidesteps the attack, deftly twisting Griff's arm and forcing him to release the knife, which clatters to the ground, his brutal efficiency a stark contrast to Griff's reckless fury. Mike pins the gang leader to the ground, his knee pressed firmly into Griff's chest. The tables have turned, the roles of predator and prey now reversed. Tyson's voice, dripping with cold authority, echoes through the parking lot. "You don't mess with people for no reason," he says, his eyes narrowing into flinty slits. In the aftermath of the brutal exchange, the once fierce gang members are scattered across the parking lot like broken toys, their defeated forms testament to the raw power and skill of Mike Tyson. The onlookers, gathered at the windows, erupt into cheers, their admiration and gratitude for the legendary fighter palpable in the air. Tyson, his fists still clenched, regards the scene with a measured gaze, the adrenaline coursing through his veins, slowly dissipating as the danger recedes. With a slow, deliberate movement, he dusts himself off, his attention shifting to the battered men lying on the asphalt. As the chaos subsides, a siren wails in the distance, the high-pitched cry heralding the arrival of the local sheriff. Pulling into the parking lot, the lawman's cruiser screeches to a halt, his headlights casting stark beams across the carnage of the skirmish. Climbing out of the vehicle, he surveys the scene before him, taking in the beaten gang members and the triumphant figure of Mike Tyson with a seasoned eye. After what seemed like an endless night, he saw the murderous Push brothers cowering behind their vehicle. A knowing grin spreads across his face as he approaches the legendary boxer, chuckling softly under his breath. Tyson, still drenched in the thrill of victory, meets the sheriff's grin with a smile of his own, a gesture that transforms his hardened features into something almost boyish. "Just teaching them a little manners," he quips, the dry wit adding a touch of levity to the aftermath of the encounter. The two men shake hands, a gesture of mutual respect between seasoned warriors who have seen the worst humanity has to offer. As the battered and bloodied gang members are hauled to their feet, the sheriff's deputies move in to restrain them. Handcuffs are snapped shut around their wrists, their protests falling on deaf ears as they are loaded into the back of the police cruiser, their cries of outrage muted by the closing of the doors. As the cruiser speeds off into the night, its siren fading into the distance, the town breathes a collective sigh of relief. The reign of terror imposed by the Iron Wolves is finally brought to an end, their menace quashed by the indomitable spirit and righteous fist of Mike Tyson. As Mike climbs into his black SUV, the onlookers, now freed from their fear, erupt into a chorus of applause, a spontaneous ovation for the hero who, in a single act of selfless bravery, restored order and justice to their town. The resounding cheers follow Mike as he pulls out of the parking lot, his tires screeching against the asphalt as he drives off into the night. As the night deepens and the adrenaline subsides, Mike Tyson finds himself driving into the darkness, the highway stretching endlessly before him. But his mind is still racing, the recent events playing back like a reel in his head. The question in his mind, the real one, has the whole time since Chris Morning had worked. In his mind's eye, he sees himself standing amidst the chaos, a lone figure standing tall against a tide of violence. As the memories flicker across his consciousness, his voice echoes in a low, contemplative murmur, his words a culmination of years of experience, a truth forged in the fires of his legendary career.